Okay, so if you look at this needs perspective and how it influences our behavior, we can see our behavior reflecting a system of multiple needs. We all have perhaps need for affiliation, need for intimacy, need for achievement, and so on. And maybe it's this particular pattern of needs and interactions among those needs that might influence our behavior. Okay. And again, we've already discussed how many different behaviors can satisfy the same need, or that one need could perhaps satisfy, or rather one behavior can satisfy multiple needs. Basically, you might have certain needs that might take prominence at certain times, and this balance of the different needs that that more or less can predict your behavior. So, for example, if your need for achievement may be highest at this moment, it's going to predict your behavior to do things that will satisfy that. In another part of time, you might have your need for intimacy being most prominent. So this changing balance changes all the time. But anyway, these three basic needs, which are power, affiliation, or intimacy, and achievement, really play a big role in influencing our behavior. The way they either work together or separately in terms of influencing us. Certain behaviors are going to be more effective at satisfying a need than others. And we have to choose among the many different behaviors that can help us satisfy a need. So, for example, let's say we have a high need for affiliation. We want to be with other people. We want to socialize. What can we do? We could go to a party. We could join a sorority. We could call a friend. All three of those behaviors would satisfy that need. However, that we might choose one or the other. So in other words, different people choose different things, or the same person might choose different behaviors to satisfy the need at different times. So really, this just illustrates how you can have one specific need that actually points us to many, many, many different behaviors that would satisfy it. And again, these incentive value, these various behaviors that have incentive value, these particular behaviors are the ones that we are consciously choosing to fulfill this particular need that we have. There are many other activities that could, again, satisfy this need, and you want to make sure that you're doing a behavior that will adequately satisfy the need. I mentioned before that sometimes we have motives that we're not necessarily aware of. And that would be considered an implicit motive. On the other hand, the self-attributed motives are the motives that we are consciously aware of, that we know that we are guided by X, Y, and Z, and that's why we do the things that we do. If it's self-attributed, you can basically self-report these particular needs that you might have. With implicit motives, you may not be consciously aware of them. You may be, but you may not be. And these are kind of like those automatic, quick, motives that might push us in one way or another. And, so this is in many ways what's guiding our behavior. We may believe that we have one particular need, but maybe there's another need that has not been satisfied, and it's an implicit need. The self-attributed motives, we have particular action goals in mind when we have these motives. If we're consciously aware of the motive, well, then we're going to have making conscious decisions about what to do and what behaviors to engage in. If our motives are implicit, it might actually lead us to behave in ways in which we're not aware of why we're doing what we're doing. So if it's satisfying an implicit motive, maybe we don't know why we're doing those things. But when we're talking about satisfying self-attributed motives, we know what we're doing. We're choosing a particular behavior that has a particular incentive value, and we are choosing to engage in that behavior. And these implicit motives often may have an emotional aspect to it. Oftentimes that emotional memory comes really quick, where we remember something and it triggers an emotional reaction. Well, this is something that maybe we're not even necessarily aware of it might be true. And if we're talking about going back to the TAT, measuring, doing the picture story exercise, implicit motives would tend to be more revealed in those kind of tests. But if we want self-attributed motives, if we want what you think about your own needs and what your needs are, then we would just give you a self-report test to measure that. But the evidence seems to be that these are two different things, and this is very interesting. If you remember in an earlier PowerPoint, in an earlier lecture, we looked at the IAT, the implicit association test. And this, again, assesses how quickly you make associations between one group and another, or between one group and a good word or a bad word. Again, making the idea, do you automatically associate one group with good things and another group with bad things, indicating kind of like an underlying prejudice that you might have. You may not be aware that you have it, but nevertheless, it can influence your emotional reactions to different people, and that's, I think, the key. You may consciously say, I'm not a racist, I'm not prejudiced, but you might have an automatic emotional reaction that might say something different. I mentioned also earlier about where with motives we sometimes want to approach the thing that we desire, and on the other hand we want to avoid things that are unpleasant. So the approach-focused motives, the motive is to obtain something. Avoidance-focused is to avoid undesirable outcomes. Now what's interesting is that there seems to be some biological evidence to this. There are biological factors which essentially make us more likely, in which we are. There are, for approach-focused motives, we will want to approach something. We want to gain rewards. And there seems to be a part of our brain that is involved in responding to that. But there's another part of our brain that responds to avoiding punishment, which, so in other words, it seems to be two different brain functions going on, which is interesting because, again, there are a lot of times we will engage in behaviors such as taking drugs and alcohol, which might be immediately rewarding, but maybe we're not as much afraid of the punishment. We just want that reward so much we're willing to do whatever we can to get it. So again, if you think about motives in those respects, there's motives that want us to approach something and others that want to make us avoid things. As an example, let's take a look at achievement, need for achievement. Especially we're talking about college students here. Basically, if you have an approach motive as a college student in terms of your academic success, what you're wanting to do is you want to achieve that success. You want to get the good grades. You want to learn something. You want to be able to perform in such a way that that reveals your success. You are looking for success. On the other hand, other students are motivated, really, they just don't want to fail. They want to avoid failure. And this is a different approach, And actually, it seems as though the approaching success is more effective at, or is more predictive of academic success than just simply avoiding failure. So keep that in mind. When we're talking about assessing personality using the motive approach, basically two general ways of doing it. One is to use a projective measure like the TAT, Thematic Apperception Test, or picture story exercise, in which you're trying to get the underlying hidden motives out of it. And again, those implicit motives would really, the only way to be able to do that would be to do kind of in that indirect way. On the other hand, if we want self-attributed motives, if we want to know what people, believe they think, or what they're consciously thinking about, then we give self-report measures. So let's talk about the TAT, or the picture story exercise. Problem with it is the reliability is questionable. Now again, it could be because there are going to be multiple pictures on one particular testing session, and people can respond all different ways to each picture, and it may be hard to connect all of them. Another thing is that to give the TAT is very time consuming. You're giving the test out, you're asking people to write stories about what they're seeing, and it's a time consuming thing. In one respect, though, a good thing about it is that if you want to assess implicit motives, really, this is a way in which you can do that. You really would be impossible to be able to get the self-attributed motives with with this kind of a measurement. And again, these are coming from like those emotional, deep within us, those affective experiences. There's an emotional tone to that that's coming through from the TAT tests. And, again, you're going to see how frequently these particular motive relevant themes are coming up, and it also might predict how often those feelings will happen outside of that. The self-reports, again, they're getting your self-attributed motives, how you feel about yourself, what you feel your motives are, your needs are, etc. And you also is tied to like the particular actions you might take in order to achieve particular goals, to satisfy a particular motive. So it would predict how frequently you're going to have those events, those motive relevant events, not just what you're feeling about it, but the things that you're doing to satisfy the motive. So that's what that would be. Again, more in the conscious. The feelings are more outside of our, sometimes outside of our conscious awareness, may just come to us. Okay. Now, one important criticism of this motive approach is, well, maybe we're looking at these motives and needs, and maybe really it's just a fancy way of talking about traits. And we've already talked about traits. We've already talked about the 5-factor theory, the big 5. Openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. We've already talked about that. And maybe these needs, motives, whatever, are just a fancy way of dressing up traits. And again, there is some evidence, there is some overlap between the measure of needs, Murray's measure of needs, and personality research form is his measure of needs, and the 5-factor model, the big 5 case. And some motives do seem to be related to specific traits. Okay. So, on the other hand, you could look at perhaps motives as the fundamental desire that we have. That's really what a person has about our motives. I think these traits are just the ways in which these motives are expressed. So, in other words, maybe you can look at the motives underlying the traits. So, you could look at it as that way as well. maybe the traits, are they really self-attributed, or are they implicit? Maybe maybe we need to identify, maybe there are some aspects of personality. When we talk about measuring the big five traits, they're kind of consciously being reported, but maybe there are some unconscious or outside of our awareness aspects about who we are that maybe could be that could be reached. And this is, again, using the TAT could be one way of getting at that. Okay, now in terms of changing behavior, when it comes to the motive approach, well, one of the things you want to do is you want to analyze perhaps what people's motives are, and perhaps enhance motives that you think this person needs. For example, if this person is socially isolated, maybe you would want to find some ways to improve this person's need for affiliation, get this person more comfortable meeting other people. That overwhelming shyness could be a big problem. You might have somebody who is in an unsatisfactory relationship, and maybe it's because this person has a low need for intimacy and really doesn't want to reveal himself and have self-disclose with his or her partner. As a result, it could be damaging to the relationship. So perhaps trying to improve one's need for intimacy could be something you do. Another thing that you could do is try to find the appropriate behaviors to satisfy these. For example, they talk about in the textbook that one point of view regarding alcoholism is that alcoholism is being often used as a way of satisfying a need for power. You feel more powerful when you're drunk and you feel less nervous. Well, maybe if there is a way to substitute something that's more acceptable than drinking to satisfy that need for power, that would probably be a good idea. Okay? Maybe someone's undesirable behavior reflects an underlying motive, and the motive may be a perfectly good, worthy motive, but the behavior you're taking is just the wrong behavior. And again, like the drinking would be an example of that. Achievement motivation. A lot of people are interested in how can I be more successful? How can I make a lot of money? That kind of thing. Well, you can encourage in your company, let's say, more images of achievement to help inspire people to be successful. You can find ways to get people to engage in specific behaviors that will effectively satisfy that particular need for achievement. So again, these are things to do. And again, think about ways to improve motivation in college students. Perhaps encouraging college students to enhance their need for achievement, perhaps, and find effective ways of satisfying it. All right. Well, next time we are going to start getting into biology, start getting into genetics and the evolutionary perspective in terms of understanding personality. And I will see you next time.